Good morning, class, and welcome to Unit 3, thinking about theme this week with Guy de Maupassant's The Necklace, or La Perruque as it is in French. Thank you for your excellent work last week on John Cheever's The Swimmer. I will send you a recording in a few days that sort of discusses some of the highlights of our collaborative reading and any sort of responses and reflections on the reading from last week. So please look for that. While I continue to work on that recording, I do want to get you started on Unit 3, which is where we're thinking about theme, which is a generalization about the meaning of a story. It's more than the subject of the story, which is what the narrative is generally about. In fact, the theme requires a phrase or a sentence to explain it. For example, losing religious faith can destroy a person's life. That could be like an example of a sentence or theme. The theme of a story abstracts its meaning from the concrete details of its plot. Characterization, setting, point of view, style, some of the things that we'll be talking about in the coming weeks. So in other words, theme is the implied meaning of all the details of a story. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't have to be a moral judgment. The story's meaning can and often does suggest principles of right and wrong behavior, but the impulse to tell a story can arise from several universal urges of the human spirit: to communicate, to create, to raise ultimate questions, and not just pragmatic ones. In short, to provide a personal expression in narrative form of our sense of what life is like. To paraphrase the writer Milan Kundera, great storytellers refuse to give explicit moral judgment a place in their fiction. Their stories usually aren't simple parables in which good triumphs over evil. To create a complex fictional world reflecting actual human experience, writers are rarely led by the desire to give a simple sermon. Instead, they provide multiple viewpoints within their stories, through their dramatizations of the conflicting points of view of the various characters. They leave it to readers to come up with their own moral judgments in the statement of the story's theme. To say that a story can have more than a single meaning doesn't imply that it can mean anything at all. You have to be able to find sufficient important details that support your interpretation. Often readers find it difficult to formulate a single sentence that captures their impression of what a story means. After many futile minutes of trying to, quote, boil it down, I quote, to a one-sentence essence, they may find words coming irresistibly to mind from another context. Written by the American poet Archibald MacLeish, a poem should not mean but be. The way the author creates the narrative by using all the elements of fiction to embody the theme is, of course, the most important achievement of the story. So to appreciate the fact that the story itself is always more complex than its bare bones meaning, you might try to write a sentence summarizing what you believe to be the theme, and then choose the story to try to rewrite the story again. Though a summary of a writer's theme is no substitute for the story in its entirety, your attempt to kind of cast that story, to recreate it, can help you understand the story better. Flannery O'Connor, who we'll actually be reading in a couple weeks, insisted that a story is not its abstract meaning, but rather what she calls its experienced meaning. A story is a way, she says, to say something that can't be said any other way, and it takes every word in the story to say what the meaning is. When anybody asks what a story is about, the only proper thing to tell them is to read the story. This week, I'd like us to think about what theme means and what kinds of definitions exist. So on Wednesday, what I'd like you to do, or by Wednesday, is to explore this idea about what is theme. Do some brief research to locate one definition of theme in literature, and add to this slide deck one new definition of theme from a credible source. I've done the first one for you. Check old textbooks, you can search through old class notes, scour Google Books and online literary journals or websites. I want you to include one definition along with the citation for that definition from the online source or the link, that's fine, for what theme is or refers to. Again, you're going to see that the definition of theme is going to vary drastically from source to source. Add your entry to our shared slide deck and include an image of either the page you found on it, the book you found it in, or the website upon which it exists. So have fun with this and kind of be excited by the sort of multiplicity of definitions of theme. I think that you'll notice that there's sort of a central idea encapsulated. So this week for the terms and concepts, I'd like you to add to our slide deck one definition of what encompasses theme. I think you'll see that there's a variety of different ways in which theme have been defined. So do some brief research to locate one definition of theme in literature. Add to the slide deck one new definition of theme from a credible source. So I've done the first for you. You can see it below. But feel free to check old textbooks, search through notes, scour Google Books and online literary journals or websites. Please include one definition along with a citation. For online sources, a link is fine for what theme is or refers to. Add your entry to the slide deck and include an image of either the page you found it on, the book you found it in, or the website upon which it exists. Have fun with this. So, for example, I used the anthology The Story and Its Writer, the central unifying point or idea that is made concrete, developed, and explored in the action of the imagery of a work of fiction. Action and imagery here is kind of unique to this definition. This week you have the privilege of reading Guy de Maupassant's The Necklace, which is, Guy de Maupassant was actually a French writer born in Normandy in the 19th century. He's the son of a wealthy stockbroker, and basically this short story, as you know, is probably written in French, and this version is actually translated for you. We're going to be thinking about translation in the discussion board post for this week, but Guy de Maupassant is his writing is characterized by compact and dramatic narrative lines. I think you'll notice that in the short story, the compactness. Maupassant's stories eliminated moral judgments and the long digressions favored by his earlier writers. And along with the Russian writer Anton Chekhov, Maupassant is credited with technical advances that moved the short story toward an austerity that has marked it ever since, a kind of plainness. These two writers influenced nearly everyone who has written short fiction after them. As Joseph Conrad recognized, facts and again facts are his, Maupassant's, unique concern. That is why it is not always properly understood. So again, we're reading this short story not only to think about what's happening in this short story, but how it's put together and the precedent that Maupassant sets for thinking about these particular details. Maupassant's lack of sentimentality toward his characters, as in his description of the, quote, little clerk's wife in The Necklace, laid him open to charges of cynicism and hardness. Even if Maupassant's stories display a greater distance from the characters and a less sympathetic irony than Chekhov's, both writers were the most accomplished of narrators in their powers of exact observation and independent judgment, and in their supple, practiced knowledge of their craft. So I hope you enjoy this particular short story. I'm noting the compactness. Also, the sort of cynicism I do see in his writing, a lack of sentimentality towards especially the little clerk's wife. For this week, I would like you to include 2 comments by Wednesday after reading the short story. One should include a hyperlink that will help your peers think about this theme of the story. The hyperlink may include an explanation, a link to a picture, a song, or any other related material to the plot. To theme, I shouldn't say plot. Please be creative with this. To add a hyperlink, you just simply right-click on a word, phrase, or passage, and in the comment, copy and paste the relevant link. Explain in a sentence or 2 why this hyperlink is relevant to the short story's theme. So you're going to actually have your readers and your peers going outside of the document to kind of look at and understand this particular short story in terms of maybe some modern adaptations, links, images, paintings. This short story is very famous and anthologized, so there's lots out there in terms of its sort of implications in our contemporary life. Does the story's title help its meaning? Can you find a suggestion of the theme in specific passages of dialogue or description? Are certain symbols or repetitions of images important to revealing the author's intent in the story? And then in a second comment, I want you to think about language. We're going to be working a little bit this week with translation. I'd like you to find an unfamiliar word, term, or concept. And I'd like you to consult the Oxford English Dictionary, which is a resource that you have access to through the COD Library database. I've included a link here. I have credentials for signing in to the COD Library, and hopefully you do too. If you don't, you can go to Visit Phillips Library and you can do that all remotely to set up your account. If you're a student here, you can set up an account for free. What you can do is you can search words through the Oxford English Dictionary. And what this dictionary does is gives you a whole history of the use of the word. For example, pot-au-feu, which is the French term used in the translation, English translation of our short story for this week, describes a large traditional French cooking pot, a dish or a recipe associated with this, especially a thick soup of meat and vegetables. And on the left here, you'll see, well, first of all, the pronunciation.
Pot-au-feu.
That's the English, and here's the US.
Pot-au-feu.
And you can also see that here we have a list of dates when this exact definition was used, from 1792 all the way up into 2002. Here are some examples in actual literature or texts. Doesn't have to be literature, nonfiction or fiction, and where it was used. You can also click Show More, and you'll see that there's etymologies that are explained where this word came from. It's French, and what exactly related languages for it. So perhaps you're already used to using the Oxford English Dictionary, but it's a great resource to use for thinking about the history of words and their etymology. So by Wednesday, please add 2 of those comments to our document, and by Friday, reply to 2 of those comments. The final assignment for this week is to create a Unit 3 discussion board post. Through your Google Sites, you're going to create a Unit 3 page, and what I'd like you to do is think a little bit about translation. So again, we're reading an English translation by Marjorie Laurie, but I'd like you to think about a side-by-side with the French. Now, you don't have to be a French specialist or fluent in French to do this activity, but I would like you to see if you can locate an equivalent passage in the English and in the French, and I'd like you to post them side by side. You don't have to be able to translate it in its exact words, but you are probably able to, as you follow line by line in the story, find the equivalent French phrase or sentence that sort of compares with the translation that we've looked at for this week. The next thing I'd like you to do is look at a third translation. So we're looking at the English translation we're reading for this class, the French version by Guy de Maupassant, and then I'd like you to look at a third translation in English by Ernest Boyd. So it's going to be a little bit different than Marjorie's translation. And what I'd like you to do is put the exact equivalent of Marjorie's English sentence, the French sentence, and Ernest Boyd's all side by side so that we can see that there's actually a variety of ways to translate the language. And that translation happens with more than just a word for word exchange. That translation actually includes trying to capture the sense and capture the meaning, the expression, the emotion of a certain passage. And I'd like you to comment after you create these 3 side by side, English, French, English, or whatever sort of order you'd like. Just make sure you sort of differentiate the 2 different English translations. I'd like you to just write and reflect upon, which translation of the passage, which English translation of the passage is more effective in promoting the theme of the short story, in your opinion, and explain it. So again, just a brief reflection on the fact that that what we're reading this week is an English translation, and what does that mean for us as readers in the English language. How do we think about the translations? What kinds of choices are being made by the translators? And which ones do you think, in your opinion, which translation most effectively captures the sort of theme or the sense of this particular story? So by Wednesday, please post this initial reflection, and by Friday, look at 2 of your peers' discussion posts and comment upon, the passages they've selected. So please have fun with this one. And I look forward to kind of seeing your side-by-side translations as the week continues. So thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoy reading The Necklace. If you have time, I've included a short story that's Henry James's kind of take on The Necklace, as sort of follow-up, called Paste. So if you have time, you might check that short story out as well. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to talking with you and reading with you about The Necklace this week. Keep up the great work.